Alright guys, so we're going to finish up these notes this week on solving by completing the square. So last week and the week before, we learned how to find our C value to make it a perfect square trinomial. And once we found our C value, we were then able to factor it. So now we're going to do the next step, which is to solve an equation for that x. So let's scroll down. Number 7. We're going to solve by completing the square, round our solutions to the nearest hundredth if necessary. Okay, so no fractions. We're going to have our decimals. So the first thing we're going to do, just like on those other problems, is we're going to find our C value. So here's A and then here's B. And notice we don't have a C. So I'm going to find my C. I'm going to take half of B. B is -8 and square that. So half of -8 is -4. And -4 squared. Remember, if you're using your calculator, put that in parentheses because it's a negative times a negative, which gives you a positive 16. So when we go to put this into our equation, we have x squared minus 8x plus 16 equals -15. Now remember, way back in chapter 1, when we were learning how to solve equations, we talked about if you do something to one side of the equation, you're going to have to do it to the other side. Right now, we changed this. On the left side, we added a 16, but then we did nothing to the right side. So that'd be like adding 20 pounds on the barbell on the left side and not the right side when you're trying to do your bench press. We don't do that, okay? So you need to make sure whatever you're adding to the left side, you're also adding to the right side. So I'm going to add that 16 there. Well, once we've done that, we can go ahead and factor our trinomial on this side, just like we did before. Don't worry about the right side of the equal sign. So factoring this is my parentheses squared. And I know it's going to be an x. And then I look at the number I squared over here to get my c. I squared a -4, so that'd be x minus 4. And then on the right side, these are both constants, so I can add them together. So -15 plus a 16. Some of you are still struggling with those positive and negative, so use your calculator. Okay, -15 plus 16. Exactly how we saw it. And we get a +1. Then our next step, we're going to go back to our rule of our square root method that we learned in the last section. Because I have all of this x minus 4 being squared. Okay, I can't move anything out of this parentheses because that squared is locking it in there. Okay, so how do I get rid of squared? What's the inverse of squaring something? Good, it's taking the square root. That's what we did in the last section. So if I take the square root of this side, I'm also going to have to take the square root of this side, right? Because these square roots and squares will cancel each other out, and we just get an x minus a 4. Then on the right side, what's the square root of 1? Some of you are going to try to tell me it's 0.5. It's not dividing by 2. Square root means what times itself. If you're ever unsure, go to your calculator. Square root of 1 is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. We also need to remember that if we're writing in the square root sign, which we did, we have a positive and a negative. 1 times 1 is 1. -1 times -1 is also 1. So this is where a little bit of work is going to start. We're now going to have two equations. We're going to have where this x minus 4 is equal to that +1, but we're going to also have where the x minus 4 is equal to a -1. Sometimes these give you two different answers, and sometimes they give you the same answer. It depends on what you're equal to. So I'm going to go ahead and solve. So to get x by itself, we need to move that -4 by doing the opposite. So we add 4. So on this first equation, we're going to get x equals 1 plus 4 is a 5. So one solution is going to be a 5. Our second equation, we added the 4. We get a negative 1 plus a 4. Again, if you can't do those negatives, go to your calculator. Negative 1 plus 4 equals a positive 3. So our solutions would be 5 and 3. Okay, let's do another one together. Looking at number 8, I need to first find my c value. So I'm going to take half of my b and square it. My b is a 2, so I take half of 2 and square it. Half of 2 is good, a 1. 1 squared is a 1. So now we have x squared plus 2x plus our c value, which we found to be a 1, equals 3. But remember, I added that 1 on the left side, so I also need to add it on the right side. Next, I'm going to factor. So our variable is an x, so I'm going to put that there. And then I go and see what number did I square to get the c. I squared a 1, a positive 1, so plus 1. On the right side, I can simply add the 3 plus the 1, which gives me a 4. So now that I have factored, my next step is to start solving. To solve, it's the same next step. We're going to take the square root of both sides, because taking the square root and squaring will cancel each other out, and we'll just have our x plus 1 on the left. Then on the right, we're taking the square root. We wrote that square root in, so the first thing I'm going to do is my plus or minus, and then the square root of 4. What times itself gives me 4? Good, a 2. After we've done that, we are ready to split this into 2 equations. So we get x plus 1 equals our positive 2, and x plus 1 equals our negative 2. Once we split into 2 equations, then we can start to solve. So x plus 1, we want to get rid of that plus 1. So we're going to subtract 1. And it's nice, you do the same steps with both equations. So if you didn't notice, I kind of work both of them at the same time. So these ones will eliminate. We get x equals 2 minus 1 is a 1. Over here, the ones eliminate, so we're left with x equals negative 2 minus 1. Again, if you're not comfortable with that, negative 2 minus 1, put it in the calculator. Negative 3. So again, we have 2 solutions, 1 and negative 3. Number 9, the first thing I'm going to do is find my c value. So I'm going to take half of my b and square it. This time my b is a 7. Half of 7 would be 3.5. And then 3.5 squared. Again, it's a decimal, so that's not always easy to do in our heads. So 3.5 squared would give me 12.25. So my new equation is going to be x squared plus 7x plus my c value, 12.25, equals 30 plus 12.25. We have to add that c to both sides. I'm going to factor my left side. The variable we're using is an x. The number I squared to get my c was a 3.5. So I'm going to add 3.5. Then on the right, I'm going to add these two numbers together. So 30 plus 12.25 would give me a 42.25. Next, I want to start to solve. So I need to get rid of my squared by taking the square root. Notice this is always our first step to solve. These all are following the same steps. Find our c, factor, take the square root. Okay? So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So square root and squared will cancel. So we just have the x plus the 3.5 over here. Then the square root of 12.25. I can't do that in my head. So square root, not 12, 42.25. Right? I'm second guessing myself. 42.25. Yep. Enter. We get a 6.5. Again, we took the square root, so we have positive and negative 6.5. After we take the square root of both sides, this is where we're going to split this into two separate equations. So I have x plus 3.5 equals 6.5, and x plus 3.5 equals negative 6.5. Then to get this x by itself, I would actually subtract a 3.5. Now, these are decimals, so this may be a little confusing to do in your head too. So if you need to, go to your calculator and do 6.5 minus 3.5. It's going to give you a 3. Then over here, same thing. We're going to subtract a 3.5. Then on the second one, not only is it decimals, but it's also negative minus something. So we're going to do negative 6.5 minus 3.5, and we get a negative 10. So those would be our two answers, 3 and negative 10. Okay, 10, I want you to try to solve it on your own. If you can't, oops, sorry, I scrolled too far. If you get stuck, just unpause the video and watch me explain it. But I want you to try. So go ahead and pause and try. Okay, so first you should have found your c by doing the half of b squared. B is negative 26, so half of negative 26, would be negative 13. Negative 13 squared. Remember, we want to put that in parentheses. Is 169. So now my trinomial is x squared minus 26x plus our c, which we found to be 169, equals negative 9. Again, adding that 169 to both sides. Then we get to factor. So factoring over here, our variable is x. What we squared to get our c value is a negative 13, so it's minus 13 in the parentheses. Then on the right, negative 9 plus 169. Again, if that's hard for you to do in your head because you have some positives and some negatives, go ahead and use your calculator. Negative 9 plus 169 gives us 160. Then next you should have taken the square root of both sides, because this square root will cancel with this squared. So all that's left over here is x minus 13. The square root of 160, I don't know what that is. So square root of 160, we get 12.649, blah, 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 blah. Now our directions said to round to the nearest hundredth. The hundredth is the second place after the decimal, so where our 4 is. So we need to look one more place to the right, which would be the 9. Since 9 is larger than 5, it would bump our 4 up to the next number. So our 4 would actually become a 5. So 12.65. Then we're going to split into two equations. So x minus 13 equals 12.65. And x minus 13 equals the negative 12.65. Next, you should have added the 13 to both sides. So in this first equation, we should get x equals, now we're adding decimals and whole numbers. So again, use your calculator if you need to. 12.25, nope, 12.65 plus 13, 25.65. So that's one solution. Then over here we get x equals, again we have decimals and then we also have those negatives. So negative 12.65 plus 13 gives us a 0.35. So those would be our two solutions. Okay, once again, if you need any kind of help, you can email me, call me, text me, send me a message through Google Classroom. What's the other one? I'm skipping one. Oh, Remind. You can send me a message on Remind. If you need to be added to the Remind, just shoot me an email and I can add you. I need your phone number and then I can add you that way. Like always, stay safe, make smart choices, and I'll talk to you later. Bye, guys.